Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of Barnard College and Women in Hollywood, it is my honor to welcome you to the 11th Annual Athena Film Festival. Our festival is dedicated to celebrating stories of bold, courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring these stories to life. So really, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Corey Luco, and I am a programmer and operations assistant here at the festival. And I would like to take a moment to thank our dedicated sponsors, whom without this festival wouldn't be possible. So please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes our work possible. Also, a special thank you to our premier level sponsor, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which shares our commitment to showcasing stories of women in science and bringing them to you. And to all of our sponsors whose names you will see before each film and event, thank you for your commitment to challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring our audiences in the process. This past year has been a wake-up call in many ways, and when we were thinking about how we wanted to bring our festival online, we really wanted to dig deeper in our programming. So we decided that we wanted to program in 8 different program areas that we felt really responded to and reacted to the past 12 months. And so this shorts program that you have just seen is part of our Tear It Down, Dismantling White Supremacy program. And in this program, we take a look at people organizing and taking action to tear down systems of oppression, specifically white supremacy. So thank you all for joining us. And I'm really excited to welcome the filmmakers from this shorts program. So I'm just going to go around and have people introduce themselves, tell you what film they're from. So Anjali, you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you. My name is Anjali Nayar, and I am the director and the writer of Oil and Water.
Amazing. Miranda?
My name is Miranda Winters. I'm the director, editor, and cinematographer of We Can't Breathe.
Ash?
Hi, I'm Ash. I had to scramble to unmute. I'm Ash. I'm the director of I'm Free Now, You're Free.
Wonderful. Sam?
Hi, I'm Sam Knowles. I'm the director of Tangled Roots.
Angelina?
Aloha Kako, my name is Jelena Keen Lee. I'm calling in from the Bay Area right now on Ohlone land. And I'm the director, producer, and cinematographer of Standing Above the Clouds.
Incredible. Thank you all so much for being here and for your films. Obviously, we love them and we wanted to make sure our audience saw all of them. So first, I just want to start off with asking everybody how they came to their stories and why they wanted to tell these specific stories and do these films. And yeah, so if Anjali, if you want to take that first, and then we'll go around.
Sure. I have lived in Nairobi on and off probably for about 15 years, but was living in Nairobi for about 12 years before I made this particular film. Mm-hmm. I think around me in Nairobi, all these skyscrapers kept on showing up in my neighborhood from Tullow Oil, which is a particular foreign-based or London-based oil company that was just moving into Kenya and had found oil there. Traditionally, Kenya had run off of tourism, fresh flowers, a whole bunch of other industries, and this was something new. And we were a little bit worried about what it was going to do to the world there and the communities that were predominantly pastoral in the kind of greater country. When I went to the region, and I had worked there a lot in the past, my first film was based in the Turkana region of Kenya, as well as I have some kids there. I think what I had made a bunch of activist films before, and what struck me was that we often don't hear the voices of women in these conversations about extractives. Like, it's often a community voice against an extractive company. And that is often a really nuanced thing, because the limitations on women's voices in those situations are more often controlled by their communities than they are by the actual oil companies. So I thought it was interesting to kind of explore what development, so-called development, looks like through the eyes of pastoral women in Turkana when oil is encroaching on their land.
Absolutely. Great. Miranda?
Sure. The film We Can't Breathe, it was originally just started because, you know, I saw the video of George Floyd getting murdered, and my team and I, we didn't really know what was going to happen. Obviously, nobody knew how big the protest would get when that first happened, and so we just knew that we had to amplify the voices that were out there, and we knew that there was no way we could not participate in the movement. And it was really interesting how we didn't know exactly what the story was going to be. We didn't know, you know, what music was going to be in it. We didn't know anything about that. We just needed to film and keep filming and keep filming and keep going to protests. And that was just a necessary thing. Like we had the cameras, you know, we own them. There was nothing we could do except for film. And then later on, we kind of made a narrative from the footage that we had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Ash, how did you come to this story?
So I met Mike through like organizing work, through political organizing work around political prisoner liberation. And I guess we were like, that's how I got to know him. And we started this process initially as just like him wanting to tell a story in like an oral history project. So I was sitting down with him for like every other week, going down to Philly, sitting down with him, like recording just him talking about his life, like, and then like transcribing it, and then having that material to work with. And then at some point we decided that, you know, adding like an audiovisual element, like a filmic element, could really add depth to the story. And that's really how the film came into being.
Right. Very cool. Sam, what about you as far as, you know, coming to wanting to showcase Attica Scott and her work?
I had been wanting to make a film about hair discrimination for a few years. When I was 15 and in Catholic school in upstate New York, I noticed one day that there was this rule in the handbook where it said like men couldn't have cornrows and dreadlocks. And I wasn't a man at that school, and I didn't have cornrows or dreadlocks at the time. I had braids, but it still felt like it had targeted me. It was like, you know, mostly white school. I was one of the only Black students. And it sort of just always bothered me. So a few years ago, I started to conceive of this film that would address that, but I didn't really know how to tell that story. And recently, around the time that I started the film, I came across this op-ed written by Attica's daughter, Ashanti. And she was just telling the story of how her and her mother kind of teamed up to change the rules, a rule that was very similar to the rule at my school, change the rule at her school in Kentucky. And, you know, now her mom, who's a representative in Kentucky, was trying to make this a statewide law. So I thought that was, you know, a great way to kind of, following her would be a great way to kind of tell the story of this kind of discriminatory practice, which is actually really, really widespread throughout the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Delina.
Thank you. Standing Above the Clouds, the film that I directed, it follows Native Hawaiian mother-daughter activists that are standing to protect their sacred mountain, Mauna Kea, from the building of the world's largest telescope. And, you know, I grew up in movement spaces with an activist mom, and so did my producing partner, Amber. And my mom always raised me with this idea that not only is the personal political, but that also there's nothing more political than how you raise your kids. So I was really interested in this idea of, you know, mother-daughter activism and movement building. And then my auntie lives on the Big Island, and she always sends me articles. That's just how my family is. They'll always just send things. And so she sent me some articles in 2015 of the first round of protests on the mountain. And I remember seeing Auntie Pua, who's one of the main characters and producer on the film, and just the way she was talking with so much conviction and being a spokesperson for a movement. And, It struck me as really rare to have a female spokesperson for a movement, and also to see her daughter Havane by her side, leading ceremony and just being really visible and vocal. I was really drawn to that. So I came to Hawaii and kind of pitched this idea of a mother-daughter film, and all the things that aren't seen by the public in how the movement's covered by the news, or through social media, just all these elements that are unseen. And she was like, well, I love that idea, but it can't just be about my family. It has to be about other families too. So that's how we incorporated Mehana and Lena Ala, the other two families, and started to build the film from there.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love hearing these stories of how you came to all of this. I think I just want to, address how, just sort of how you address like the roots of oppression in each of your films, because so much of them really have to get to the bottom of what you're talking about, and as we identified in this program, like what's at the root of this is white supremacy, and sort of how you wanted to unpack that in your films, as well as tell these stories. So anyone can pick that up if they want.
So for We Can't Breathe, part of the film, like, it parallels the current protests or the recent protests with protests from the 60s. There's a juxtaposition where if one thing will be on one side and the old 60s footage will be on the other side. And that was it was interesting because we hadn't planned to go in that direction initially. I mean, like I said, we were just filming and then we put it together later. But it was interesting because while I wasn't looking for that historical element initially, I just kind of came across footage from the 60s and that looked the same, almost exactly the same as the footage that I had. So that's kind of one way I wanted to just show, this has happened before and it needs to happen again, and it needs to keep happening until we, tear down and dismantle white supremacy.
Ash, your film also very much goes into the historical, and really digs into that because it's telling a decades long story. Can you talk a little bit about how the intergenerational aspect in your film?
Are you asking me about the ways?
Kind of like the relationship between Mike and his mother, and him picking up the work that she was doing as well, and continuing on with that. Just a little bit about their relationship.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Mike, it's an inherited lineage of resistance. I mean, because he has to, because his parents are both incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
And also growing up, I mean, he grew up as a Move baby. He was raised by Move women.
Mm-hmm.
He was raised by Pam and Ramona Africa, essentially, and I think it's just the environment that he is immersed in, and who he is. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, just I just think that a lot of these, I think all of these films do such a good job, like I said, of getting to the heart of what's going on. So just
I could probably put it in.
Yeah, sure.
My film. Sure, there's two real veins of oppression or tension, I suppose. On one side, for oil and water, which is again about oil in the Turkana region of Kenya, there's one kind of big sense of tension of communal land ownership, which is traditional land ownership for pastoral people, versus a kind of colonial instituted idea of ownership of land. And so when you're bringing big industry in, it's got this sense of who's this is the owner of this particular land, whereas the tradition has always been to share. So that's like one real thing that kind of comes to a head in this film, is just these two opposing systems that don't really work together. And on the other hand, it's less about like white supremacy or so on, but more just like traditional roles of men and women, whereas women were in charge of, or are in charge of, family and food and like the household and all of these types of things, whereas men are traditionally in charge of the animals, which also the land is a part of that. And so when you're talking about who should benefit or be the voice of talking with big industry, if it's an issue of the land, then the men have that role. But if the women are in charge of making sure that the kids, have enough to eat, then shouldn't they also have a say in what happens to a specific piece of land or the deals that are made? And so you're kind of dealing with these different forces that are partly colonial, partly kind of traditional, just roles of men and women within a particular community, which can be different from community to community. And that are the two sources of tension. Like, what role do women have when they are not part of either of those systems that are dominating?
Yeah, for us, there was this framework that was put forth by Ilima Long, Dr. Ilima Long, who's a Hawaiian. She studies media, and she was the head of the Mauna Kea media team. And she talked about how, the protectors, they're leading physical intervention, which is, physically putting their bodies on the line to make sure that construction can't start and construction vehicles can't reach the summit. And then as filmmakers and storytellers, we are doing narrative intervention. And narrative intervention works hand in hand with physical intervention to shape the story around what's going on, to show, what it means to be a leader, what it looks like to be a leader, what community looks like, and what a kind of decolonized space can look like, feel like, and how it operates. So that's how we see our film playing into this. And we're expanding the short into a feature-length documentary that will go into that a lot more. And I just wanted to acknowledge, too, that while our films are tackling white supremacy and talking about dismantling it, we're also still operating within white supremacist structures, like particularly in the film space and in the documentary space. So a lot of that work is also trying to dismantle white supremacy in the creation of the films themselves by, working collaboratively with people in the film, working with, choosing team really carefully and working with people that have, similar viewpoints and aligned missions, because it's not like it's just isolated to the things that are on screen. It's everything that is around us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
I would say that too. Like, I'm sure in all of our practice as documentary filmmakers, and Sam, this is probably a little bit different because it was much more of a personal, and also Jelena, your experience, but more often than not, I constantly am wondering, okay, this might be happening in my backyard, but am I the right person to tell the story? And are there better ways of telling it? And so I've spent probably half of my time now working on a tech project, which grew out of one of my films called Timby, which is called This Is My Backyard, which is essentially kind of democratizing the idea of storytelling and allowing people to build cases and evidence and get stuff out there without the intervention of third parties or journalists, or even if we're brown. So, so I think that those are all things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm sure you guys are all thinking about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for that. So I want to just talk quickly about each individual film. So Sam, I wanted to talk to you about Attica Scott and just her as a subject and how, how it was working with her, because she seems like such an incredible force. And, since the film wrapped, she's been doing, she's been leading so much for trying to get justice for Breonna Taylor, and has been, she penned Breonna's Law and all of that kind of stuff. So it would just be really great to hear about sort of your relationship with her with making this film and, her motivations and stuff.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Representative Scott. So I love to talk about her whenever I can. She's really a force. She's incredible. I think, one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize in the film is that, yes, she's this representative who's working in the capital of Kentucky in Frankfort. But she really her roots are really in activism and organizing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it becomes really obvious in the film because that's where she really, really shines. She's very much driven by that work. And I think that's reflected in the kinds of bills that she puts forth, including her hair bill, which I chronicled, but also, now Brianna's Law, which she's fighting for right now, but also bills about Black maternal health, gun control. I think she's really, and I think it's really obvious in the film, but she's very much informed by her community, her community in Louisville, but also by the communities all across the state. One of my favorite things that I noticed as I was following her, when I first met her, we met her at her office in Frankfurt. And I think I never really talked to her about this directly, but I think one of the skills that becomes really obvious that she has is the way she code switches when she's in Frankfurt and talking to her constituents there. And then when she's, in churches and even, in all across the state, or in barbershops. And she's really, I think it just speaks to how good she is at her job, and how much she relies on those kinds of activists and roots, and in fact, like her hair bill was informed by the activism she did with her daughter. Like she took that, she changed the rule within a week. There was this discriminatory hair rule. She changed it with her daughter in a week. And then she's like, I'm going to take this statewide.
Yeah.
So she's amazing. And I think she was really inspiring for me. I felt very lucky to be able to watch her in action.
Yeah. And I'm interested to know if some of the reactions that you've gotten from the film from other people who have experienced hair discrimination, because you follow, it's not just her, but you follow some other people as well. So
I've gotten, I think a lot of people kind of feel seen. I think one of the struggles with the film, and I think I think this goes for a lot of issues that I kind of either chronicle or face personally as a Black person, but sometimes you're like, is this the issue that is the most important thing right now? I think that's just like it's just like a kind of constant thing that runs around in my head. And I think a lot of people had never heard the term hair discrimination. They'd experienced it, but it hadn't been given a name. And just to have it, kind of given a name for people who had experienced it was they were like, oh my gosh, wow. And there's a woman fighting to prevent it from happening. This is actually, I feel seen. And I think for a lot of other people who were kind of on the outside, I think for them, some of the things that I heard was that they were like, oh, I went into this film thinking this is like so innocuous, like this is not really the thing we need to be talking about right now, but that they can't, and I'm grateful for this, that they came away feeling like, oh, this is one way of kind of like dismantling or knocking down one of the pillars of white supremacy. It seems innocuous, but it's something that is important, that does feed into this whole machine.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's been, thankfully, like a lot of the reaction.
That's really powerful. I'm glad that you've gotten that reaction from the film. Ash, I would love to talk to you about the title of your film and sort of where that came from, because I think that one thing I find so fascinating is about the placement of the comma in the film, in the title, and sort of what that says a little bit about freedom. So I would love to hear some of the story behind that.
Yeah, the film's title came from a line that Debbie said to Mike when she was released from prison in 2018 after being incarcerated for his whole life, which was 40 years. And she said, and in the film, Mike recounts this to Debbie, but she actually said it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he says, or she says, when she left prison, when she got out, that because she was free, that he was also free. Like he could fly.
Yeah.
I'm free now, you are free. And I think the comma placement, that like reflects the cadence of her statement, and it also the intention behind naming the film that is to really drive home this notion that people on the inside, when they do time, when people are incarcerated, people on the outside also do time with them, and that you're completely fragmenting relationships and community and family when you're putting a person in prison, which is the intention of prison, which is a complete geographical immobility, not just for a person, but also, you know, completely affecting, with an A, affecting everybody that is interconnected to this person.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think you know, I wanted to ask you about it because you really do feel that in the film. You feel that in their connection, and you feel that with like Mike's story as he goes through it. You sort of always feel his mother and like with him. So I think that's captured really beautifully in the way that the story is told. Jelena and Anjali and Miranda, I wanted to see if any of you wanted to speak to what it's like filming in protest zones. You know, because obviously Miranda, your film was completely filmed in that, and Jelena, there's a lot of you're at a lot of the actions specifically. So, and same with Anjali. So.
Sure. Yeah. It was like I was filming the subject of my film, Reina. You know, we see the film through her. It's kind of you follow her through the protests. And that's actually my wife. And she was going through the protests, and so was I. And a lot of it, there was so much tension, you know, in the streets, and some of that was it was really difficult to film a lot of the time. Sometimes because people didn't know who we were necessarily, and they thought, are you Fox News? And then if we went over to the Trump side of the protest, they're like, are you CNN? You're Antifa, all this stuff. And it was really hard to find a comfortable place to film. And eventually, like we did, as you can see in the film, we got plenty of access to the protests. But there was that tension, and then there was also the tension of me watching my wife through my lens go and talk shit to some Trump protester on the other side of the aisle, and me being scared. Like the whole time I was scared. It was really tense, and I was carrying a 15-pound camera on my shoulder. It was shot on, you know, and I'm not a big person, you know, I'm fairly small, and there's these huge people around me, and there's chaos everywhere, and there's people on both sides accusing me of being the wrong media, you know. And then there's the tension of just watching, you know, the pain of the protests, like real visceral pain. And then sometimes, you know, the protests would turn into celebrations, and that felt a lot better. But there was definitely a lot of tension in the streets in LA we continued filming more. Like we're also producing it into a feature-length documentary because we continued filming after all the protests that you'll see.
Right.
But it's just the moods of the protests really ended up kind of dictating the way the film ended up, which I thought was really organic, although stressful a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just asking this because, you know, obviously what we think so much about is like a film festival and storytellers is like, you know, who's documenting these movements that, you know, are happening all the time, and, you know, and the work of the story, narrative intervention, like Jelena was talking about, and sort of how that plays into everything.
A couple of things that you kind of mentioned, and it's interesting, like my background before, I was a foreign correspondent, so I've been in my fair share of protests and war-like things and so on, but there is this part of me, and I'd be really interested in hearing your feeling about this, Miranda, where when I have a camera in front of me, I am a participant, like I'm there and I'm feeling it, but there is some level of I don't know if it's adrenaline or this idea of the lens between you and the public that is like a filter. And it's, again, it was probably different because you were there with your wife. So your subject is really somebody you're emotionally attached to in a quite profound way. But when I'm a part of movements as a protester, sometimes like I try to not have a camera. I try to not have anything around me because I want to be a participant and I want to feel it in the same way that everybody is feeling it. And sometimes I feel like I'm removed a little bit with a camera. And maybe that goes back to, the history of where I entered into film as a foreign correspondent. But I don't often feel as entirely present in those moments because you're thinking about your gear, you're thinking about how heavy it is, you're thinking that you have to like make sure that you save it and the safety of your team. And there's so many other things that are going on besides being like present in a moment. So I don't know if that ever affects you. It might not, but it has certainly.
Yeah, it definitely affects me. I mean, it's a lot easier for me to be in those spaces when I do have that separation, because I'm not necessarily the most outgoing person that is like running down the streets and like screaming about things. I really want to do work, but I need that camera on me to feel useful and to feel. But it does separate. It is a shield in a lot of ways for me because I'm there doing a job, I'm working, but then of course there are certain moments where it gets real and you're like, shit, like I gotta put my camera down because this is getting too intense. Like I can't keep filming. But I totally agree with you that there is a wall kind of, and it can be a shield and it can be helpful for some people. And then, but if you do want to really run through the movement, and you are separated by that camera.
Yeah. It's just like a thought. Sorry, it's really noisy. It was just a thought because I think throughout this year, despite being in a number of protests, I never picked up the camera. Like I think I took 2 photos on my phone from all of the events throughout the year. And yeah, it was part of that. Maybe it was like, yeah, it was a question of like, who's, again, like, is this something that I can contribute to? Is this something that I can't contribute to? What is the better position to be in as somebody who's somewhere on some ladder of being POC? What is my role? To be an observer, to be a participant, to be a supporter. And those are all things that I think get nuanced when we're doing film work that is activism based.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree about choosing when to film and when not to film. And I think I've been working really hard on how to hold space from behind the camera, but it is really different. And just on a personal level, sometimes it is really necessary to put it down and just experience things. But something that this conversation has made me think of is, for me, I use one of the small Sony series cameras, so it just looks like a small thing that you're taking photos with, and pretty small lenses too. So a lot of times, being small bodied, being female, looking young, it can be really hard in fundraising, but in actual production, it can allow me to like access space that otherwise wouldn't be able to be accessed, or it allows like what I perceive to be more authentic, like experiences on camera, because it's not a giant thing that I'm like really worried about maneuvering. Also, I don't like carrying heavy stuff, so I like to keep my camera package as small as possible. But I think the different ways that society perceives us, it can be helpful for production and navigating those different protest situations or other situations. So that's something that I found on the front line. Also, I was living in a tent for some of it, which was challenging with charging things. But we were lucky there was like a media team that had one outlet. So I think the charging and then dealing with like mist and wetness were the 2 biggest technical challenges. But otherwise, mostly I think it was emotional challenges and like mental, just being in the right space.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are the other, one of the other things that I love so much about these films is a lot of them, and we've touched on this, like do really deal with, people from different generations, like coming together, like Representative Scott and her daughter, and the mother-daughter teams in Standing Above the Clouds, and Debbie and Mike. And so I love that y'all were drawn to those kinds of stories. I know Jelena talked a little bit about it, but Asher, Sam, do you know if there's a particular reason why you were drawn to that kind of a story, or is it just sort of that it kind of unfolded in that way?
I think for me, it sort of just unfolded that way because the way I found the story, I was looking for something that would help me address hair discrimination, but that would be active. And so that was like, this story of this mother-daughter who like teamed up together to dismantle this rule, but then Representative Scott ended up taking that statewide. So it wasn't really intentional, but it did start to become a theme as the film progressed, because whenever you ask Representative Scott about what she did at her daughter's school, she always will say it was all the kids. It was like Ashanti and her classmates. And Representative Scott actually did a lot to help them,
right? But
platform, and she guided them. But she's so much about the next generation, and she's so much about legacy, and so much of what she does is driven by that. And I thought that was really beautiful. And I remember there's this mural that becomes a theme in the film because there's a woman who is experiencing hair discrimination, and she has a young son, and she sort of says, I don't want my son to have to deal with this. And I remember we found this, Louisville has really beautiful murals, mostly of Muhammad Ali because he was born there. But there was this one really beautiful mural of a mother breastfeeding her child. And in early cuts, I remember some higher ups on my team were like, we don't know if this fits. It's kind of random, but I fought for it because I thought that had become such a theme of like this legacy, and it's so much of what Attica is driven by. So it sort of emerged as something that we focused on in the film.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I think that there are two reasons. Thinking about it in retrospect, there are two reasons why, like, looking at that family relation was so powerful to me. One is that I think in a lot of movement spaces, it's pretty insular, where you only have like a bunch of young kids, or like you have elders organizing. And I really appreciate seeing an intergenerational nature of struggle, because that means we're learning from each other. We're not like reinventing the wheel. We are actually looking at history and like perhaps coming out with like a historical material analysis of strategy and like how to organize. And I think, just like, and seeing the kind of like the lineage of struggle being passed down, and I think that thread is really powerful. And the second reason I realized in retrospect is that I'm like starting to make another film, and it's about my mother and I's relationship. And I realized only after beginning to make this film, which is about my mother and I's fractured relationship, but using that to look at the post-colonial condition of Singapore, which is where I grew up, that I realized that making this film with Mike about his mom, I was probably interested in that because it was in some way also exploring like my own mother wound. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. This has been such a great conversation, and thank you for your powerful films and agreeing to be part of this festival. I really love this program, and I really love these films and what they say and the work that y'all are doing. So I hope to see more films from y'all in the future. Is there anything else anybody wants to just say to the audience, or?
I was just going to say thank you so much for having us and for programming us together in this block about dismantling white supremacy.
Yeah, for sure, of course. Yes. Also, I want to say that, Jelena, one of the images that's been rolling around in my mind for so long is that you have that shot of the elder woman, and she has zip ties on, and she just like waves to the camera, and it's just so, I don't know, it's a very powerful image. So it's been rolling around in my head for a while.
Thank you. It's the kind of elders we can all aspire to be.
Yeah. Thank y'all so much, and have a great day.